Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Kanchi Batra, business editor, diplomatist. The first session gave a kickstart to this discussion. Our expert panel, which included former and sitting ambassadors, diplomats, and subject experts, lead to an enriching discussion. The first session assessed the key takeaways from the high-level EU-India leaders meeting and discussed the next steps in the strategic partnership. Of course, we do expect the same from this session as well, equally enriching and informative for our viewers. I would like to convey to all of you participating in this webinar my heartfelt welcome. I do so most sincerely, not only on my own behalf, but also on behalf of Ms. Linda Brady-Hawk, our publisher, who had intended to be here but in the second session as well, but could not join. She has therefore asked me to convey our apologies to all the speakers, to extend a most cordial welcome to you and to offer her best wishes in the task before you. This is indeed a very crucial time to talk about India-EU relations. It is our hope that our speakers will take advantage of this opportunity to come up with valuable recommendations and conclusions that will be beneficial to both India and EU. I also had the absolute pleasure of releasing our special report, India and EU plus 27, in the first session. As promised, we will be sending a copy to all the speakers and authors. I also had the absolute pleasure to interview the ambassador of Finland to India. Very kind of her. Thank you, Ambassador. Without further ado, I will introduce the chairperson for this session, Professor Nidhi Piplan Kapoor. She's the head Symbiosis Center for European Studies, SCES, Symbiosis International Deemed University, India. We now look forward to an open and constructive discussion and wish you a most successful webinar. Over to you, Professor Nidhi. The virtual podium platform is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchi, and the team Diplomatis for inviting me to chair this session with such an elite panel and attendees joining us from different parts of the world today, in particular from India and the EU member states. A very warm welcome to you from the sunny capital, New Delhi. While the sun may not be shining metaphorically on New Delhi and my work city, Pune in Maharashtra, and of course other parts of India that are badly impacted by the pandemic at the moment, but we applaud the efforts of solidarity and the timely support extended by the EU to help India combat the devastating second wave of COVID-19. Much appreciated. Today's webinar is timely as we also recently celebrated Europe Day on May 9th to mark our relationship that shares the ideals of freedom, peace, and solidarity. Now, the high-level EU-India leaders meeting hosted by the Prime Minister of Portugal, Mr. Antonio Costa, with our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, who represented India, and the EU represented by the heads of state and government of 27 EU member states, Mr. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, and Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission on May 8, 2021, brings in a moment of profound geopolitical significance. By bolstering the dialogue between the world's two largest democracies, it is the harbinger of a new impetus to our relationship with a positive effect on international trade and investment. To give you a background, India and EU have periodically pledged to expand cooperation, building on the architecture set out in the 1994 Strategic Partnership. But the realization of that ambition has remained a challenge compared to the opportunities that were offered by our economies and the dynamics of development at different levels. The Porto EU-India leaders meeting promised to be that pivotal moment in this regard, giving a new momentum to the partnership between the world's two largest democracies. This dialogue is considered crucial to rebalance relations between India and the EU, and it is key for us to reaffirm our belief in democracy, rule of law, tolerance, universality, and indivisibility of human rights. As you're aware that EU is India's biggest trading partner and second largest destination for Indian exports, trade between the EU and India has increased 72% in the last decade. The EU is also the leading foreign investor in India, and its share in foreign investment inflows has more than doubled in the last decade. Some 6,000 companies are present in India, generating 1.7 million direct and 5 million indirect jobs. Growing investments from India in the recent years have also meant an active presence of Indian companies in the EU as well. Given this context, the meeting is considered to be a turning point in expanding the cooperation with India and EU in resuming negotiations towards ambitious and balanced trade agreement capable of acting as a key driver for sustainable growth and jobs creation both for India and Europe, and the negotiation of an EU-wide investment protection framework that would provide greater stability and certainty to companies from India and the EU to expand their presence in each other's market. And it also focuses on new areas of decisive importance for the development of contemporary societies and economies, that is through digital transition, connectivity, health, mobility, energy transition, and very important, climate action. Now, the EU and India are already key partners in issues of growing relevance for the development and sustainability of our societies. So will this be an opportunity to elevate our relationship using the huge potential of our democratic spaces to advance trade and investment ties, green recovery, security, and to support effective multilateralism and a rule-based order? Will this revived enthusiasm and commitment break the deadlock and bring in some cheer for India and EU's cooperation? Well, to answer many of such questions, we have four esteemed panelists who will be delving into the deliberations that took place at the high-level EU-India leaders meeting on May 8th, and what will it translate into going forward for India and the EU. I welcome His Excellency Mr. Freddie Swain, Ambassador of Denmark to India, Her Excellency Ms. Ritva Kokuronda, Ambassador of Finland to India, Ms. Ursha Pondelake, Policy Advisor for International Trade, Renew Europe Group, European Parliament, and Ms. Velena Chakarova, Director, Austrian Institute for European Security Policy, European Parliament. Before we begin, I would like to share some info on housekeeping for this webinar. You can use the chat function to share your thoughts, ideas, and also let us know where you all are joining us from. Each speaker will deliver their talk for about 10 minutes, followed by a Q&A in the end. Please use the Q&A feature on the bottom right to address questions to the panelists by choosing Panelists and Attendees option. You can send us the questions through the Q&A box through the session, which will be taken up in the end, if time permits. I now welcome our first speaker, His Excellency Mr. Freddie Swain, Ambassador of Denmark to India, to throw a spotlight on the different aspects of India-EU relations and whether this meeting will mark a real change in the relationship. Ambassador Swain, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm extremely pleased to be allowed to be on a panel only of women. That is the dream of all bureaucrats and the dream of an ambassador representing a country where gender equality is part of our DNA. So thank you very much indeed. I'll not mention all your names because that will take too much time. I'm ambassador, but I'm also a diplomatic ambassador in the sense that I'm trying to find out what we can get out of this summit. And believe me, this summit is, I think, words like watershed, transformal, and so forth, and all these words are really highlighting that this summit is unique, and it's really bringing a new dimension to the EU-India collaboration. Both big spaces, but also the most populous democratic spaces of the world. And to understand the context of this, it's important to keep in mind that this time we are fully aligning all our strategic priorities and position. And we do it in a context of geopolitics, where the rule of law, democratic principles, and so forth are the guiding principles and the direction that we would like to see pursued in the future. And this summit is highlighting that. India compromised, EU compromised on a number of issues in order to seek and get and obtain this alignment. And that will definitely be the future DNA of a democratic world dealing with tons of issues. Today I will put focus on the green part, the climate, or I understand that was the whole idea, and it's also dear to my heart. And let me say that by the mainstreaming of all our interests, framing our priorities in a global geopolitical situation, we are also thereby bringing in naturally and logically the climate change. The protection of our planet, or Mother Earth, or Mar, as you call it here in India, is so important. We know that India and the EU, we come from very different directions, but the objective remains the same. We want to secure that this world will survive and that we can bring a better world, a more sustainable world, a more greener world to our next generations. It's so important. We also know that India is so big. India has a scale when it comes to opportunities, to challenges, or to the population, but also to the opportunities. And in that context, whether we are pursuing the climate change goals, the Paris Agreement, whether we are trying to implement, execute on the Sustainable Development Goals, India has to be part of the equation. There's no solution that will help the planet, all of us, our future generations, without India being on board on that. And therefore this summit, despite the fact that perhaps it did not produce more, let's say, the most tangible results with the climate track, but the whole framing is securing that we have a vast number of priorities where we are working together in this overall framework. When it comes to climate change, we have to understand that we come, as I said, from different directions. EU is a matured space. We have at large very strong priorities when it comes to the green transformation. We have set out very ambitious goals. We have the net zero and all this, and member states, including Denmark, we have very, very ambitious goals. And we are moved by these kind of political ambitions. India has a different take, and it has a lot to do, seen from my point of view, with the fact that India is on the path of developing. India has to develop. If you take the consumption of electricity in India, it's only 1/3 of the global average per capita. So should we tell you, the Indians, that you have to stop that kind of development and you cannot be allowed to develop your country? The answer is clear-cut no. But we have to secure, and that's why this summit is also important. We have to secure that this development is happening in the best sustainable and greenest way possible. And that's why it's so important that we now have aligned all our priorities, all our objectives in the overall global framework. And that will also take us forward when it comes to the climate. What is important, seen from my point of view, and kind of landmark in the text about the protection of the planet and the green transition, that is the following. And I call it the Kerry formula. John Kerry, the special climate envoy. When he was in India, he tried, of course, to persuade the Indian government to accept a net zero obligation. India refused. They might come out with it at some point of time. But what was really elaborated was the formula, the John Kerry formula, where the recently announced US reductions of CO2 emissions was equal to the very ambitious objective of the Indian government when it comes to renewable energy. 450 gigawatt of renewable energy to be in place by 2030. And we know that energy is, by all means, at least in developing countries and in particular in India, energy is the most important driver for growth, but is also the most important, unfortunately, driver for emissions that will harm our planet and our atmosphere. That's why it's so important that we have really worked on this formula, and we accept that we are not forcing India to accept a net zero. I think they will do it at some point of time, but they are very insisting on, and some will say rightly, others will say that's not good enough, but they want to peak. They have to develop their economy, and they're often talking about two transition phases, one leading to the peak and another one leading from the peak down to net zero. And the only kind of conditions that should be attached to that from our side, I think, and I find it in this text from a statement from the summit, is that it has to be done in a green, sustainable way. And that's why it's also so important, and we'll find it here, and it's something that has been mentioned many, many times, and unfortunately we were never able to deliver on it. That is substantial green financing. COP15 that took place in Denmark in Copenhagen 2009 gave a commitment that the developed world will, let's say, mobilize at least 100 billion US dollars per year for the developing countries. We have never come anywhere near to that. But in order to secure that these countries like India and others can transform properly and sustainably, we need to secure that they have access to green financing. So that's an important part of that. The other part is, of course, transfer of technology. You will not be able to do any energy transition without transfer of technology. And therefore, being the Danish ambassador to this lovely country, I'm extremely pleased that we were launching last year at a virtual summit between our Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi. We launched what we call a Green Strategic Partnership. That was really focused only on bringing what Modi has said many times. India has the scale, Denmark has the skills, meaning the solution. And we added speed because urgency is there, and scope because the scope of what you can do within this kind of strategic framework is so important. So therefore, it's important really to have a strategic framework surrounding what we are doing, also when it comes to climate. Don't forget that climate is not just political visions, statements, it's also actions. And in our Green Strategic Partnership, which I know has really inspired a lot and other countries, and it's also kind of a driver for the Indian thinking, we have claimed and we have proven that green growth is also creating a lot of new jobs, permanent new jobs. So it's not just about sacrificing your development, it's also a tool to develop a stronger labor market, a stronger creation of jobs. It's so important. What is finally extremely important, and I find it to some extent in the text, is that, and you'll find some of the words, we need to have a fair, equitable, and some will also say just kind of sharing of the burden when we are looking into the climate changes. How to go about that? Well, we remain to see. We'll have the COP26, we have the G7 and G20 before that, but we have to work forward. Finally, and the last aspect that I would like to raise here is the connectivity. The connectivity agreement between India and EU is second to none. It's perhaps the most elaborated strategy bringing in concrete, tangible ways of developing connectivity. And green connectivity, energy connectivity is a part of that. So I think we could be extremely optimistic. Now EU and India have aligned all their priorities. They are, and we are really aiming for the same objectives, but now we also have an operational framework within that kind of context. And that makes me both happy, but also optimistic about the future. So now we will not only have a common future, we'll also have a common green future. And we have to deliver skills from our side. India has the scale, but jointly we will speed up, and the scope of what we are doing so important. So everything has been transformed, also the EU-India relationship. So I'm really pleased to be given this opportunity to address all of you, and especially all my good friends sitting on the dais. And once again, I like gender equality, and I'm extremely pleased that I could also speak to all of you, bringing the next important subject to which is close to my heart, namely the green transition. So thank you very much indeed. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Common green future, that's very interesting. Thank you, Ambassador Swain. Happy to see the growing convergences on climate diplomacy, green financing, technology, connectivity, and the acknowledgement by leaders on the importance of a free, open, inclusive, and a rule-based Indo-Pacific. Now, as we heard from Ambassador Swain, both India and EU have been at the forefront of climate action, and they're working on different priorities owing to the varying nature of their economies. However, ways to attain growth, create jobs, and meet developmental targets with minimal carbon emissions are priorities for both economies. That has been a very important agenda at the EU-India leaders high-level meeting, as also reiterated by Ambassador Swain. There has been a tremendous set of developments over the past few years that reflects a dramatic shift in the thinking of policy makers, companies, individuals, and organizations. Now, how has this whole narrative of having to find a balance between sustainability and growth been underpinned in the strategy? We have with us our next speaker, Her Excellency Ms. Ritva Kokkuronda, Ambassador of Finland to India, who will talk more about the green recovery plans. Over to you, Ritva.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Professor Nidhi, Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues. It's such a great pleasure indeed and honor to be one of the speakers. So thank you very much for asking. And I think also that it is my dear colleague Ambassador Freddie was mentioning that we have gender balance, a little bit gender unbalance here. It's very seldom actually that you are able to participate in among the panelists where you have this way. Normally it is the other way, but I'm really happy that it is so, especially since I am at the beginning of this year chosen as the European Union first gender champion. So I'm very, very pleased to be participating here. I think we all can agree that the Porto meeting was really indeed very fruitful and with new substantive results and openings and progress in the area which was already mentioned, for instance, in climate trade or investments as well as connectivity, so as well the deepening of the EU-India strategic partnership. Furthermore, the leaders meeting gave a good signal of the importance of the Indian and European strategic partnership. And I think also a very strong stimulus of the implementation of the roadmap to 2025 and of the last summers. I really want to express Finland's sympathies and solidarity with the people of India with this pandemic issue, and this is indeed our joint priority. But we really have to be able to look to the future already at the same time. To the time when the pandemic has been over, how could we turn losses into wins and shape a better world? India and the EU and the world at large will probably then experience a shift economic growth. We act wisely if we direct this recovery into a digital and green transition. As stated in the joint statement, digital transformation, including new technologies like artificial intelligence and innovations in general, should be at our service and for our citizens as well, through boosting economic growth and thus creating quality jobs. Equally important is green transition, particularly towards more ambitious and concrete emission reductions and climate-friendly solutions in general, like my colleague just talked about. I would like to point out 3 points actually. I would like to take up the EU's green recovery just shortly, then a little bit about my own country's experience on sustainable growth, and then about EU-India cooperation. The European plan for post-COVID green growth is more than a recovery plan. It is once in a lifetime chance to emerge stronger from the pandemic, transform the economies of the European Union and its member states, and to create opportunities and jobs for the Europe where we want to live. In Porto, it's now our time actually to make Europe greener, more digital and more resilient. The EU's long-term budget, coupled with a temporary instrument designed to boost the recovery, will be the largest stimulus package ever financed in Europe. Of total of 1.8 trillion, approximately 160 trillion rupees, joint EU funding will help to rebuild a post-COVID Europe. In Porto, the leaders agreed to enhance further the partnership in support of the sustainable modernization of our economies. They committed to accelerate the implementation of the new circular economy and resource efficiency partnership to intensify bilateral exchanges on relevant regulatory approaches, market-based instrument and business models. The EU invited also India to join the global alliance on circular economy and resource efficiency. This is a very important area in the sense that when we are thinking about also our very strong partnership, whether it is investments or trade also, we in Europe looking very much, I mean, we have resources, but we are also looking here very strongly the partnership in the field of our green recovery. When I think about my own country, in addition to the mentioned European Union package to facilitate the green recovery, also the individual member states will invest heavily for future transition. In Finland, the government program for sustainable growth will support the development that is ecologically, socially, and economically sustainable. So meaning the Sustainable Growth Program Finland will boost competitiveness, investment, research, development, innovation, as well as measures to raise skills level. So this is all about the sustainability, and we really see the future on this green sustainable growth. For a small country, it is always so that we have to be a couple of steps ahead of the development, otherwise we wouldn't survive. If I think about my country's history, for instance, it's partly about history of survival, because really you have to be all the time very flexible at looking where do you find this, where do you find the beef in the future, and the beef of the future is not only thinking about our children and grandchildren, about their existence and what kind of climate they will have, but you can combine it with this sort of sustainable green growth. And these are topics that are equally important to any country in the world, especially in post-pandemic era. The Finnish Sustainable Growth Program, which is, by the way, in the English also in website, will, through a green transition towards a carbon-neutral welfare society, contribute significantly for protecting our planet and fostering growth and well-being. When it comes to the European Union-India climate and environmental cooperation in a post-Porto meeting, I think that the same priorities that have been identified jointly by the European Union and also by the government of Finland were also raised during the EU-India leaders meeting in Porto last Saturday. The leaders highlighted the need to urgently address the interdependent challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. They committed to contributing to the success of the upcoming Biodiversity COP15, Climate COP26, and the second UN Ocean Conference. The leaders also stressed the importance of achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and acknowledged each side's leadership and progress. Very, very important result here. They looked forward to a new work program for the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, for which the goal is to deepen cooperation to speed up the deployment of renewable energy, promote energy efficiency, collaborate on smart grid and storage technology, and modernize the electricity market. Other joint efforts were encouraged to promote green growth and a sustainable modernization of the economy, including decarbonizing industry and transport and accelerating the implementation of the new circular economy and resource efficiency partnership. Last but not least, we of course always need a good framework for anything what we are doing, and that is based on sort of joint regulatory framework. Therefore, of course, the WTO's reform and WTO's role is much more important than ever, probably in the future as well. The leaders agreed to enhance the trade and investment relationship to realize its untapped potential, I would say. And the resumption of FTA is very good news. A balanced, ambitious and mutual beneficial FTA would bring our economic relations, our economic green relations to a completely new level. An early investment protection agreement would encourage our companies to invest in a sustainable manner and bring actually also more certainty among EU investors. So I'm very much looking forward for implementation, further continuing implementation from our part also, and of the EU roadmap, and further to enhance the relations. And the Danish colleague was referring to the partnership, strategic partnership with India. We are very much in the strategic partnership in digitalization and in green energy. So I'm very much looking forward in my work and in work among the European Union, and of course with all our Indian friends, to really explore this incredible potential which we still have there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Ritwa. The EU's climate change and clean energy projects are very well aligned with India's vision. The cost of action in climate change, resource efficiency, biodiversity, clean water, clean air is much smaller than the cost of inaction, whether climate or non-climate. Sustainability-driven investments will lead to a green and inclusive recovery post-COVID. And while the immediate attention for green recovery will be to address climate action through shovel-ready projects like renewable energy or energy efficiency, there is need to complement these solutions by strengthening resilience to climate change and investing in nature-based solutions. Up next, I invite our next speaker, Ms. Ursula Pondelek, Policy Advisor for International Trade, Renew Europe Group, European Parliament. Ursula will talk about the current stance and futuristic plans under the long-stalled broad-based Trade and Investment Agreement, BTIA, which was initiated at the 2007 summit with several rounds of discussions until 2013, but it hit a deadlock over a range of contentious issues. Ursula, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Much appreciated, Professor Nidi. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's also an honor for me. And let me start also by expressing deep solidarity with Indian people, with India suffering from the pandemic. It's a race against time, but you are not alone. And I'm sending you like big 5 S's, which are also the guiding principles of India: Saman, respect; Samvad, dialogue; Sayog, cooperation; Shanti, peace; and Samriddhi, prosperity. So all the best with this, and also in the post-COVID world that we will, I really hope, shape together with the European Union. my previous colleague speakers, they were speaking about very concrete issues, and which actually are everyday life, and people get impacted by it, and they bring these issues definitely bring prosperity and better life, environment, and all this. And I would like to focus on trade, not because it maybe, I'm sure that other issues are equally important in the outcome of the summit, but it's just the area I know best. Because here in the European Parliament, we were following negotiations very closely, trade negotiations since 2007. And every time the negotiator came to us, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years, and they said, because everyone who ever worked with India became extremely enthusiastic about it, because it's such a great country with great people, with such amazing opportunities. So even the EU negotiators, they were really eager to make compromises and to conclude. And every time they came to the Parliament, they were very optimistic, saying, now it's really maybe the momentum, now it's a low-hanging fruit, we should now use this window opportunity. And then it didn't happen, but I think now it's really the opportunity to not just a window opportunity, but to open all the doors and houses and all our hearts, and really try to negotiate these agreements together. Because without trade agreements, of course, we will still trade like we do, but this trade has very high tariffs. I mean, there are very serious hurdles regarding services, people-to-people movement, and also the trade without trade agreements, without multilateral solutions, and without bilateral agreements is also free of rules. So if there are no agreements, there are no rules, and this is not good for people and for prosperity, because trade really has shown, like rules-based, sustainable and open trade has shown to bring jobs and prosperity, and to create friendship among peoples and nations. So the decision to resume talks on the trade agreement is a very positive one, and I would just like to mention a few issues that were problematic or sticking points at the time, and also that I believe that there is an opportunity this time to solve them, because since the last negotiations there were also several policy and legislative changes in both partners, in India and the EU. So I'm sure that this will also enable us to come closer. Yes, in market access, there were issues on like cars and car parts, and these tariffs were the ones that the European Union wanted to lower, and still, of course, does, and also wines and spirits. But here, you know, products produced in India or in the European Union, they are very much complementary. They are not necessarily in competition. So there, I'm sure they address different segments of the market, and there is an opportunity to bridge this gap. I mean, everyone who's been to India knows that the great Suva wine or Amrut whiskey. So, I mean, these are great products that would also European consumers would be very happy to try. In services, services is extremely important also for India, of course, as we know, because of IT sectors. One of the issue might be, again, this adequacy status regarding the data, and European Union has revised its data protection requirements. But a big opportunity is, of course, mode 4. It's the presence of people for providing services in another trading partner. So here, I mean, yes, the UK has a very specific relationship in India, but this mode 4, mode of services, presence of person, was a little bit problematic with the European negotiations with the UK. We know, for example, that some politicians who were championing for Brexit, they were exactly criticizing the presence of foreign workers in the UK, including the ones from the European Union. So this, you know, may also be an opportunity, because EU without the UK may even be more flexible and open to all India's wishes in this regard. And in the meantime, EU also reviewed the Blue Card Directive and then Intra-Corporate Transferees Directive, which could make this transfer of workers easier. In retail, we know that there are huge opportunities in single retail and multi-brand retail, and India's reform is taking its path, and India will decide on this without or with the trade agreement. This is completely to India to decide, and to use all the benefits that this could offer. And so even India's decision to completely open up this retail sector, there would be nothing in the trade agreement, and this is something that the European Union already assured before, to limit India's right to regulate and to protect small retailers and small farmers from benefiting fully from all these openings. Intellectual property rights, we know that this can be a very difficult chapter, but we also know that despite, the European Union in some recent agreements that concluded, of course, did go beyond the TRIPS agreement to ensure legal framework fits modern technology. But both sides also have common interest in promoting innovation and combating fake products. And and also have solid rules on design and copyright. And ever since the start of negotiations, the guiding principle for the European negotiators was that an agreement in this area could in no way hamper the access to medicines, to affordable generic medicines, and this for sure. I mean, this European Union, this is a sacred principle. Then, of course, there are different barriers to trade and this, of course, require a lot of joint cooperation, a lot of discussion. There might be, of course, the EU directive, the REACH directive, chemicals. Then EU has some directives on traditional herbal medicinal products. And now, there are, of course, new legislative instruments as well. For example, the European Union will now gradually introduce something which is called carbon border adjustment mechanism, that is supposed to be like a sustainable development instrument, environmental instrument. And the condition for this is, of course, that it must be absolutely WTO compatible, and also that it should not discriminate between foreign and domestic producers. Trade and sustainable development, the mandate given to the Commission, who negotiates on behalf of the EU, yes, is to have a sustainable development chapter related to climate change, environmental and labor clauses. This is kind of a standard chapter in the EU negotiations, and I know that even in previous negotiations, India was part of these discussions, and I'm sure that a very, very good agreement can also be found in this area. And geographical indications that will now be taken out of the general trade agreement and be negotiated as standalone agreement can really have the potential to be a low-hanging fruit, because the agreement was not very far away. The two sides were not very far away at the moment. It was just some decisive steps at the end that this didn't get through. But it's something that both sides have interest. Also, India has interest in protecting some non-agricultural GIs. So possible acceptance on both sides of this list could be possible. And then for the investment agreement, also it's a very important agreement, because it will create protection and rules. And here there is a recent idea from the European Union to have, like, for dispute settlement, investment court system, which would then be upgraded to multilateral investment court, and this would make all these disputes transparent, and also the right to regulate by both sides would be highly highlighted. There are also other issues or legislation where both sides need to cooperate. EU, for example, has a legislation which is called the Generalized System of Preferences, and this is actually the tariff lines that the EU gives to developing countries, and we are now in the middle of the revision of this regulation, and definitely India's cooperation and India interests will also be taken on board in this legislative procedure in the Parliament. And as was said before me, on WTO reform, now we really have to seize this momentum, and India and European Union are partners to champion the rules-based multilateral system, to reform the two-tier system, to keep it, but to reform it to be more efficient, and actually to advance the reform of the WTO. I believe that we should be guided in this by the Sanskrit principle Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the world is one family, and one is a relative, the other strangers, say the small-minded, but the entire world is family. Leave the magnanimous, and let our negotiators, our politicians, be magnanimous, and hope that they will be successful in this. Of course, they also must be supported by businesses on both sides, because politicians can often, or officials like me, speak a lot, but actually all these should also be driven by people, by businesses, by consumers, by citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Usha. When you said Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it resonates with me so much, because the university that I belong from is formed with this motto, and being the only university in India for international students. So how much it means and feels like being at home when you say this. So excellent. Thank you so much. And as we heard from you, that clearly Indo-Pacific region is key for the EU, and the decision to resume negotiations on various aspects is a welcome step for easy access in both key markets. This will ensure a more balanced, ambitious, comprehensive, and mutually beneficial trade agreement that would respond to the current challenges. And this is very aptly stated in the joint statement as well. So thank you so much. Now, between peacekeeping, military missions, and facilitating greater ties in terms of maritime security, the European Union and India have jointly strived to achieve an elevation in terms of global multilateralism. What prospects does this EU-India leaders meeting bring for the Indo-EU security cooperation amidst a global pandemic and other geopolitical tensions that are manifestation of a deeper global churning? I invite the last speaker of the session, Ms. Velena Chakarova, Director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, will shed more light on this. Velena, over to you.
Madam Chair, Excellencies, dear guests, and also our dear viewers and listeners, thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the chance to present a little bit different perspective. I am in the luxury position to not be diplomatic today. That means I will try to give an additional layer, to present an additional layer why the relations between the European Union and the member states on the one side and India on the other side are so important in the light of the new global power competition, in the light of an increasing systemic rivalry between United States and China. And by doing so, I will try to give you a more geopolitical, one might say a cynical view on global affairs, but that is the reality in which I operate as an analyst. And I think that this layer is very important and is also one of the layers which led to this logical result, which we saw on May 8th. But before I start, I also would like to extend my personal wishes, but also, of course, on the side of, on part of Austria, our official wishes for speedy recovery. A whole nation is suffering right now, and we all, of course, here on the old continent are closely observing and trying to help with what we can. On May 8th, actually, the first consignment of Austrian COVID-19 support also arrived in India, and we are so grateful that we have also the European Union mechanism that actually could provide and coordinate the help of many member states that have joined. Now, going back to geopolitics and geoeconomics, and I can start with a quote by our European Union top diplomat, Borrell, who actually posted a blog on the Indo-Pacific that was prior to our strategy on the Indo-Pacific region, which was approved in April, and then later on at the beginning of May, logically, we also have a very important turn, so to say, watershed moment also in the relations with India. So he said that the Indo-Pacific region is the region where geopolitics and geoeconomics meet. Now, we've heard already from our previous guest speakers that India and the European Union represent two of the world's largest democracies, but also largest economies. And they are indeed significant players in the global economic and trade affairs, and also are operating in this new format, this new context of global power competition, which has witnessed a shift from the Atlantic towards the Pacific realm due to the unprecedented global rise of China. Now, following the COVID-19 crisis, these years, in my personal view, marks the obvious manifestation of what I call the Indo-Pacific Decade, with United States and China, but also many significant regional players such as the European Union, Russia, and of course, at the center of it, India, being the main protagonists of an emerging competition, coupled with also new cooperation opportunities, as we've heard previously. So currently, we are in the middle of a new systemic bipolarity between the United States and China that comes slowly but surely to light, and we need to take it into consideration when we enter into new regional alliances, partnerships, and cooperation formats. So that means that all these various regional players, including us on the old continent, but also, as I mentioned, India, Russia, Japan, and so on, are right now facing a situation of multiple ad hoc constellations, determined by the goal of playing a fine balancing act between the systemic rivals, United States and China, while trying to avoid a final decision on taking sides. That means we are right now in this transitional period. Now, with India being on its path to becoming a third largest economic power in this very decade, probably, and also as a natural long-term rival of China in the Indo-Pacific region. This means that this area, this geoeconomic space, but also geopolitical space, is slowly but surely becoming the main arena of global power competition in the 21st century. That is why geopolitics and geoeconomics meet exactly in this region. And against this background, the European Union and India witness a unique situation with newly emerging opportunities to unlock the full spectrum of potentials and cooperation models. Some of them were outlined before. So, in my view, this region is stretching from the Indian and Western Pacific Ocean to the littorals of West Africa and East Asia, and it is beyond any doubt that the region will play a crucial role for Europe's future due to its economic and geostrategic position and importance, based on the direction of export of the European exports, as well as the nature of the European trade flows, which are predominantly facilitated along the maritime routes along the Indian, so the routes in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. There are three important issues I want to underline. The first is the reconfiguration of global supply chains towards the Indo-Pacific region. The second is that Europe has recognized its role as a security actor in the Indo-Pacific region. And the third is that the free trade agreement with India has in fact a geo-economic importance, and beyond that a geopolitical one. So these three layers are actually determined and are going to determine the future of the bilateral relationship between the European Union and India. So the first reconfiguration of the global supply chains away from China is expected to create new synergies in terms of business and connectivity opportunities between Europe and the Indo-Pacific region. The global disruption of supply chains has actually taken place during the COVID-19, but is going to continue following the COVID-19 crisis. And that means that moving production from traditional hubs to new ones will take certainly time and will require a lot of trust building. But it will also create these new geoeconomic advantages, particularly for New Delhi, but also as seen from the European Union perspective. So regional centers of power, such as the European Union and Japan, have already begun considering a shift of manufacturing options towards new regions. Now, when it comes to Europe's role as a security actor in the Indo-Pacific, here the most important element is, of course, the strategy on the Indo-Pacific region. Prior to a European Council conclusions on the European Union strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific regions, there were several member states that have also adopted their own guidelines and approaches. And I suppose that this process will continue and will actually be accelerated now following the Porto Summit between the European Union and India. And finally, why is the free trade agreement to be considered as a geo-economic endeavor? Well, concluding this agreement will undoubtedly strengthen the global positioning of both actors in this current multilateral architecture. And of course, the special focus lies also in responses towards global and regional challenges. And we heard many solid, excellent analysis on that. Even though that India and the European Union have strong convergence in strategic interests, there is no getting around the fact that these two actors need a facilitated, institutionalized agreement. So we need this agreement in order to deepen further our relations and to foster a far-reaching partnership. So this is, so to say, a necessary condition. Both Brussels and New Delhi would adopt a coordinated approach in their external actions to further deepen the partnership, and many possibilities are already existent. I'm not going to touch upon them. So 3 concrete recommendations on my side based on these new geopolitical realities in the Indo-Pacific region and in global affairs as such. One is that we need to facilitate a holistic process of basic ground rules to foster a successful reorganization of the supply chains towards the Indo-Pacific regions. And we need to start now because, as I said, it's in the common interest of both the European Union and India. So this process will require a lot of flexibility, it will require concessions, and it will require dynamic, really ad hoc decisions, but these decisions will have also long-term implications for both actors. So it's really important to start now and to not waste further 10 years in discussions and negotiations. Now, second recommendation is that an active engagement and investments in the maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region are necessary to guarantee the security of this region and its supply chains, and to enable the free flows of trade, of energy, and services within these regional networks. So the European Union and the member states should not allow to be sidelined in this specific region and in the security debates and discussions. As we know, there are also other like-minded partners and actors that are already very active and involved in the region, so we should also seek participation in multi-layered platforms and formats. So the European Union should clearly start playing the role of a security actor, and this is also in India's interest, in order to diversify its security portfolio and to build a solid counterweight to an increasingly assertive regional player, China, which now also has gained an access to the Indian Ocean through the economic corridor in Pakistan and the port in Vadar. And finally, changing the narrative in Europe on both institutional and national level is already happening. We saw it with the Porto Summit and as regards the free trade agreement. This is a must. It means that we should consider this free trade agreement as a long-term geo-economic approach towards establishing a far-reaching partnership, not just with India, but for the sake of our security interests in the Indo-Pacific region. So to conclude, both actors will benefit from the strategic reassessment of their common interests and goals in the Indo-Pacific region, and they should develop coherent narratives and plausible approaches for concrete actions based on the long-term vision of an engagement by following what I called a third way. That means not explicitly taking sides in a deepening systemic rivalry between Washington and Beijing, but looking for a third option by building a solid ground for multilateral global affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Velena. I think this areas of peacekeeping, nuclear cooperation, and maritime security represent disparate challenges and opportunities at different levels of EU cooperation. Thank you so much for that. It's almost time, and unfortunately we'll not be able to take questions, but I'm sure our audience today received an intensive insight into the strategic path ahead. The high-level EU-India leaders meeting is indeed a landmark moment in the relationship between the two nations, and a strategic partnership through foreign or security policy, multilateralism, Indo-Pacific connectivity, climate change, digital, broad trade and investments agenda is the road ahead from realizing the potential to an accomplishment that we are seeking for. India and EU are true natural partners. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. I now hand over to Kanchi, the organizer of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nidhi. I am delighted to have been given the pleasant duty of delivering the vote of thanks this afternoon. I thank all of you for joining us today. Thanks to each and every one of you for being here with us today. I wish to express my gratitude to all the speakers. Ambassador Freddie, he had to actually leave. Ambassador Ritwa, thank you so much, Ambassador. Ms. Ursha and Ms. Velena, thank you. And Professor Nidhi, you did a very fantastic job in keeping the session moving. I must tell you that I was getting a lot of messages from our viewers. You did a great job as a chair. So this brings us to the end of session 2. We shall resume in 10 minutes with session 3rd. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much.